So I want to start off by thanking you for joining us, these events, these opportunities that we have here online. If you've got your Bibles, I'm going to invite you to turn to Luke's Gospel, chapter 7, verse 11. As I record this, we are approaching one of the most unusual Mother's Days in recent memory, in my memory anyways, Mother's Day 2020. And you'll probably hear me say it a few times. It's almost Mother's Day, or maybe it is Mother's Day as you're watching this, or maybe it's just past Mother's Day. This is a story about a mother, but this is not just for mothers. Luke chapter 7, starting at verse 11. Soon afterwards, he, Jesus, went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As they drew near to the gate of the city, behold, a man who had died was being carried out. Now, the man who is being carried out on the stretcher was the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and he said to her, "Do not weep." Then he, Jesus, came up and touched the stretcher or the frame that they were carrying the dead body on, and the bearers stood still. And he, Jesus, said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak. And Jesus gave him, or restored him, or returned him to his mother. You've got to admire how Luke sets this up. He teases us with just enough similarities to make the differences stand out. So there are two groups here set to collide. It's inevitable that one group will impact the other. What's not certain is which group, which crowd will influence the other when they collide. A great crowd is approaching the gates of the town of Nain from the outside, while another group, a considerable crowd, is approaching the gates from within. At the center of both crowds is a young man. One young man, Jesus, is being followed by disciples and a crowd eager for a miracle. They are looking for something. I mean, whenever Jesus was in town, something happened, some great teaching, some powerful display of God, a great parable or story would be told. And so they are following with expectation. The other young man in the other crowd is being followed by a grieving mother and a crowd of mourners. There is no expectation here. They're not looking for anything. They've already lost it. One young man, Jesus, is leading his crowd. The other young man is being carried by his crowd. One young man, Jesus, is life itself. The other young man is lifeless. Luke doesn't provide a lot of details here, but with two quick verses, there is enough here to realize that something is about to happen. The only other character Luke seems to identify besides the crowds and the two young men at the center of their crowds is this mother caught up in the drama. We don't know her name. We don't know her age, her socioeconomic status, but we are given two pieces of information which are enough to mark this as a considerable tragedy in her life. First, we are told that the lifeless body now being carried through the gates was her only son. And then Luke adds four words which intensify the sadness of this tragedy. She was a widow. That is, she had already lost her husband. She is now alone in the world. For a woman in the first century context, this was a deeply heartbreaking catastrophe. The considerable crowd around her is small comfort. No doubt they are genuinely grieving with her. It is a tragic story, but tears will provide small comfort and precious little help in the days that lie ahead for this now childless widow. She's a widow who's lost her only son. You remember, if you page back into the Old Testament, the story of Ruth and Naomi, both childless widows, forced to pick up scraps left behind once the fields had already been harvested. This woman is also now a childless widow. While her son lived, she had the promise of provision, the potential of grandchildren. The future was bright, but now she is a childless widow. Can you imagine the chaos that must have happened when these two large crowds both tried to squeeze through this small town's gates at the same time? Luke, however, completely ignores the noise, the bumping, the jostling, the awkwardness, and the confusion that must have happened, and he zeroes in on Jesus. And I want us to focus in on a couple things that Jesus did, and I believe he longs to do for us today. Verse 13, Jesus saw her. Jesus sees you. The word here loses its punch in the translation. Earlier this week, I was in a Zoom gathering, and I saw Andrew and Ty and Greg and Brent. That's how we use the word. You know, I saw them. I went for a walk, and I saw my neighbor cutting his lawn, or I saw my neighbor working on her car. But that's not this saw. It's not the casual saw, the way how we often use the word. The word used here, to see, or Jesus saw, means more than to just see. It means to notice, to pay attention, to give your attention to someone or something. With the word used here, it's a gift to see someone. You gift them with your attention. It's a sad truth, but when we used to meet every week in church buildings, a lot of people came and went without being seen. Sometimes people attend churches for months, years even, and are never seen. It doesn't make church a bad thing. I'm just stating the facts. And perhaps if I could drop a challenge in here, when we once again get to a time where we can gather together, can I challenge you to make sure that you see the people you are gathering with? To open up your eyes and to give them your attention. It's almost Mother's Day. It's a story about a mother, but it's not just for mothers. Do you feel unseen? What is it that you are carrying in this particular season of your life? Pain, joy, sadness, health, sickness, fear, helpless, strong or weak, Jesus sees you. You have his attention. You may feel invisible. You might feel like no one knows or cares, but right here, right now, Jesus is seeing you. And it gets better. Verse 13, when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her. See, Jesus could have seen and still walked by. He could have quieted the crowds around him out of respect and offered condolences to this poor mother. There is no need to intervene here. The deed is already done. The boy is dead. Arrangements have been made. The final resting place secured. Nothing to see here. Keep moving. But instead, Jesus had compassion. Again, a powerful and rich word here. To have compassion in this sense is to be consciously aware of a person's need and to be moved by a desire to personally help. Let me say that again. To be consciously aware of a person's need and to be moved by a desire to personally help. It's a pretty loaded definition, so let me contrast it a little bit with what we might have done. Knowing the situation, having discerned the tragedy that we have collided with, knowing the times and the road ahead for this woman, we might have tisked, such a shame, tisk, tisk, tisk. Somebody really ought to do something for this woman, we might have said to our companions. Old school, we might have said, let's take up an offering for her. Let's take up a collection and raise some money. New school, we might say something like, let's start a GoFundMe page for her. We might have considered her financial situation, her need for accommodations and food and the road, the days ahead. But she's not grieving because she's poor. She's grieving because she has lost her son. She's not grieving because she might lose the crops or the farm or the house. She has lost her son, her only son. This is the difference that seeing makes. If you see, but you don't really see, you can have compassion, but still end up missing the real need. The woman was surrounded by a considerable crowd, but none of them could actually meet the real need. Again, it's Mother's Day, a message about a mother, but it's not just for mothers. Are there things in your life that have maybe died? Sometimes the things in our lives that die need to stay dead. Sometimes. But sometimes there are things that Jesus desires to restore. Maybe dead is the wrong terminology. Maybe you're just exhausted. Maybe it's not so much dead as it is that you've run out of gas, that you've exhausted your resources of patience or kindness or love or affection or strength or grace. Maybe it's not death so much as it is exhaustion. Sometimes they can look the same. If you run out of the confidence or strength or patience or wisdom that you need in order to move beyond this COVID pandemic thing, are there things in your life that need to be restored, that need to be recharged? What do you need, really need? Maybe you need an extra measure of patience or wisdom in the face of a decision, in the face of decisions that were unthinkable a month or two ago. Maybe you need added strength for each unpredictably new day. What do you need? Now pay attention to Jesus' response here. 3 things in quick succession. Jesus speaks to the mother, Jesus stops the crowd, and Jesus commands the young man. He speaks to the mother, he stops the crowd, and he commands the young man. His words to the mother is 2 words in the Greek: weep not. Stop crying. What a strange thing to say to a person grieving at a funeral. Could you imagine? She's already lost her husband. She's off to bury her only son. If anyone has a right to cry, it's this woman. I can't imagine saying to someone in the midst of grieving, stop crying. I've been there. Standing over the casket of someone you love. You don't want to hear that. I don't care what tone of voice you use. But you know what I think? I think that Jesus had already restored this young man to life before he said to the mama, don't cry. I think at the heart of Jesus' words was this truth: there's no need for you to keep crying. Weep not. If it's strength you need, he's given it. If it's wisdom you need, it's already supplied. If it's patience, then trust him. Trust him. Then Jesus stops the crowd and he says to the young man, "Come on, young man." In verse 14, "It's time to get up. Why are you still lying there?" In verse 15, the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus restores him to his mother. Again, Mother's Day, a story about a mother, but it's not just for mothers. It's a story of restoration. It's a story of hope in the midst of what seems hopeless. It's a story of grace. It's a story for each one of us. I don't know, I trust that God has spoken to you through this already, and I hope whatever it is that He may have spoken to you, that you have written it down or made some sort of note in order to remember what it is that He has said to you. Don't lose it, don't forget it, and don't shrug it off. Maybe for you, the character you most identify with is the mama. Maybe like the mama in this story, you've lost something. Maybe it is as big and significant as hers, your loss, a spouse, a child, or maybe it's something like a job, or an income, or security, or maybe it's something more subtle. Maybe in the midst of this season in which we are living, you find yourself having lost your patience. Maybe you've always been or always seen yourself as a patient person, but maybe that's all changed in the past 8 weeks or 10 weeks or 12 weeks. Maybe it's your confidence in yourself that you've lost, or maybe it's a sense of peace about today or the future that you've lost. Maybe it's the joy of your salvation that you need restored. I'm here to tell you, Jesus sees. Jesus sees you. He sees you and your situation, and He has come to restore. Trust Him. Maybe the character in the story you most identify with is the young man lying there being carried by the crowd, wiped out, finished, lifeless, directionless, waiting for others to tell you what to do or to take you to some destination. Jesus commands you to get up. You're not done yet. There's work to do. There are others who are depending on you. Trust the voice of the Master. Stop allowing yourself to be carried along by the masses, by the crowd. Jesus is calling you to get up. He's telling you what it is you need to do, and He will lead and guide you. Why are you still lying down? It's time to get up. Maybe you feel most like just another head bobbing about in the crowd. It doesn't matter which crowd, both end up in the presence of Jesus. That's good news. And I'm here to tell you to open up your eyes and pay attention, because when Jesus is present, something is bound to happen. God is wanting to do something. Jesus is present. Don't get annoyed by the others now clogging the town gates. Lean into Jesus. Regardless of how you see yourself now, church, I want to put it to you, when this season we are in is over, we need to be prepared to play the role of Jesus. Will you be prepared to be like Jesus? Regardless of how you see yourself now, regardless of the circumstance that you find yourself in now, when this is all over, will you be prepared to be Jesus? Now, I'm not making predictions here. I'm only suggesting to you that we are surrounded by people in need now, and we will be surrounded by people in need after. And if we don't see them, truly see them, what hope do they have? Did you know that more people have died so far this year of suicide than have died of the COVID virus? I know the numbers are changing daily, But suicide is a pandemic that will not stop when social distancing measures have passed or when a cure is found. We need to be ready to be like Jesus, to have compassion like Jesus, to see as Jesus sees, to speak like Jesus into the lives of those who are broken, to move against the grain of the crowds and command life into those things and into those areas that have died. Look at verses 16 and 17. May it be said of our days that the fear of God seized the hearts of our community. May it be said of our days that God was glorified. May it be said of our days that God visited and was among his people. Amen.